just to ask some questions and clarify some of the aspects in the. But if you want to submit right away, right? If you want to submit without my suggestions or comments, of course, please feel free to submit by the 25th. I guess it's always better to have some feedback on your work. Um, Actually, I guess we have people. Why?
I'm recording already.
Thank you, Natalia. Any questions so far about the email, about the templates, about the first assignments, the dates? Any suggestion, questions? I guess everyone received the email that I sent.
Yes, I received. No questions. Everything's clear. Thank you.
Not yet, at least.
Good.
Not yet. Please let me know if you have questions. So I'm going to share the screen and start talking about pump storage potential of Brazil. So this is kind of the main research that I have been developing in my academic life. And I have a lot to talk about, so I'm going to go through as quick as possible, and please let me know if you have some questions. So the lecture will go through the need for power in Brazil, the need for energy storage. So you remember power and energy, they are different things in the spectrum of storage. Power requires a very short amount of time of storage, but just be able to apply electricity really quickly.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Marcos. How are you?
I'm fine, leaving my physiotherapist.
Great. You finished early today?
Yes, because we have classes, so I decided to do it earlier.
Perfect. Okay, take care. Don't. I can see you driving, so please make sure that you drive safe.
Okay.
Cheers.
No problem.
So I'm gonna share my screen. Need for power in Brazil, need for energy, potential for pump storage in Brazil, environmental aspects, and the computational model. So I'm gonna go through the dynamics of the model that I created to find pump storage locations in Brazil. I'm gonna share with you the codes. I'm gonna share with you the results, and you can use it as you feel like. If you want to use it for your project, for example, for the assignments for this class, of course, feel free to. It will be a great pleasure to see how you use these results. So the need for power in Brazil is being debated very recently because of the drought that Brazil has been suffering. There is a lack of rain and uh, the lack of water available to generate electricity with this huge potential for hydropower generation. Hello, Flavio. So we have pretty much everyone. That's great. Hello, Flavio. And so we have around 120. Sorry, this is not the case. You can see very well here, but this is around 100. Where is the 100? This graph is not very good. For some reason, they make this graph that you don't see. What's So hydropower generation capacity in Brazil is around 102. The thermal generation is around 48 gigawatts. You have 14 gigawatts of wind, solar, half around 3 gigawatts, and nuclear we have 2 gigawatts. The maximum demand happened in the summer of last year, 2019, and it was around 90. This is 90. For some reason, the graph is not working. 90 gigawatts. So 90 gigawatts, it could be supplied with hydropower plants. Of course, if you have the water available very close to the turbine for you to turn on during these 2 hours where you have peak generation in order to supply the demand. If you don't have water, you still have 48 gigawatts of thermal electricity capacity. Around 2025 is for gas generation, where you can turn on whatever you want. You have other ones. You have coal. You have biomass, which are inflexible. But if the cost of electricity is very high, if the maximum demand is reaching soon, the cost of electricity will spike in order to make sure that all the thermal electricity plants are operating. So this 48 gigawatts of thermal, they will almost 100% sure be able to supply electricity. So you only get around 30 gigawatts. Sorry, 48 minus 90 is 40 gigawatts. So 40 gigawatts that you need to guarantee the supply, which can surely be supplied with the hydropower potential that we have in Brazil, even in a drought. Wind, we can rely on wind because maybe it's a day there's no wind in the whole of Brazil. Solar power also, maybe the demand starts at 6 o'clock. Everyone is taking shower and air conditionings are very high on. But this is not the main problem in Brazil, because we have almost double the capacity, the installed capacity of the peak demands. Peak demands are usually happen during 2 or 3 hours in the day. So you would be able to supply it, even if you're in a drought, because you make sure that you save some water in order to generate during those 2 hours. Alternatives to supply this power in Brazil are to increase the capacity of existing power plants. So most power plants, they are built and they are left with some holes which you can fill up in order to increase the capacity of the plant. You could build daily pump storage plants that store energy at night, generate during the day. The problem with them is that of daily pump storage is that they would only make sense to be operational if you are in a drought. If all these capacity are not able to fulfill the need. So maybe 5% of the time in the year, you might be able to use it, 20% of the capacity during the day. So it turns out that it would never be feasible to invest in such a daily storage hydropower plant. Gas thermal electric plants, yes, of course, this is very, very interesting, but it's not the best solution because we don't produce our gas that we consume, and we will be reliable. We have to rely on gas from Bolivia or from other countries, and it's not the best solution to rely in other countries, given that we have so much renewable potential in Brazil. The management improvements of hydropower plants. So this is the solution that I'm going to talk today. So you make sure that you always have water in your cascades, in your hydropower potential, in order to supply the peak demand. And another solution is to diversify the supply alternatives, because if it's not windy, maybe sunny. If you have a drought, you have a lot of wind generation, which will maintain your level of your reservoirs high. You can do biomass, you can do all the other alternatives and have a good mix, so that you don't have a crisis. Because if something goes bad, something is gonna help you out, and have a good mix, good balance in your grid in order to have a reliable supply of electricity. On the demand side, there is the possibility of increasing the cost of PLD, for example. This already happened in the past. For example, in 2014, the maximum cost of the PLD was 820 reals per megawatt hour. It was around 300 reals more than the cost today. It was very high. They realized that Brazil didn't need so much flexibility in the cost of electricity prices, and they decided to reduce at 520. They also had issues with the GFS, the mechanisms that operate the regulation of the electricity sector, and having such a high cost of electricity for peak demand for during periods was not appropriate, so that they reduced the PLD. But during the crisis, this was very important, because companies that had a contract for electricity, they decided to stop producing, for example, aluminum and other high energy consumption products, and they bought this aluminum from other countries. They stopped producing, so they reduced significantly the consumption of electricity, mainly in the industrial sector. And they made money out of it because they had very good contracts of electricity, and they sold their electricity contracts and stopped consuming electricity. They instead of producing, they imported from other countries. Other interesting aspects is to have energy tariffs. For example, in Brazil, we have the green flag, the yellow flag, red 2 flag, which varies the cost of electricity for all the customers. And if you have a drought, the cost of electricity increases 30 to 40%, and then people will realize that they should reduce their consumption, and this would reduce the risk of having a power shortage, so not being able to supply the demand, the peak demand, because the demand will reduce. Energy rationing, of course, is an option, but is definitely not it should not be considered as an option. It is the last resource. Cut some people out of the grid and stop supplying energy. So my proposal for resolving the power capacity in Brazil is to improve the management of hydropower potential in Brazil, diversify the supply of alternatives so that you don't have an energy shortage, because increases the portfolio of different alternatives. If you have a drought, you have a lot of winds and things like this. And in the demand side, you can vary the cost of electricity, but not ration the electricity. As I mentioned in the hydropower lecture, the second lecture, what we don't want in Brazil that will cause a big problem for power supply is not to have water to use the hydropower potential, all those turbines, substation, transmission lines that can easily, very cheaply produce electricity in peak hours. We have to make sure that we always will have water at least for 2 hours generation during the day. Maybe we don't generate base loads, but at least during the peak hours in the day, we have water in order to supply this power. Now talking about the energy, the need for energy storage. So instead of power production, the generation during 1 hour, 2 hours during peak demand, the need for storing energy for a month, for 2 months, for a year or several years. So Brazil has been developing its grid, relying a lot on hydropower. They're building particularly plants in the Amazon region they stopped now because there's too much hydropower generation in the Amazon region during particularly the wet period, which starts in January, goes to February, March, April, May, and in the Amazon finishes in July. In the southeast finishes in May, even in April sometimes. So this is the amount of hydropower expected in Brazil to be generated. The problem is that there's a big gap between the summer and in the winter, something around 16 gigawatts difference of hydropower generation, which does not allow Brazil, for example, to build more hydropower plants in the Amazon, because hydropower plants in the Amazon will only increase here because in the dry period, the generation will be very small. So that's one of the reasons people stop developing new, for example, Tapajós and new hydropower plants in the Amazon. There is a huge potential, but this imbalance doesn't allow that to happen. For example. And another issue is that, for example, the amount of storage that we have in the reservoirs in Brazil is stopped increasing. So we have to stop relying so much on hydropower, find new solutions. But even if we have other solutions which are which are sustainable and renewable, it would still be good to have a lot of reservoirs in case there is a crisis. So another option is to increase the energy storage potential of Brazil in order to increase the energy security of the country. Looking at the reservoirs now, we still have a lot of reservoir available because they are not being used, right? So we have a lot of reservoirs in Brazil, but they're built in a location where it doesn't rain like they used to rain, and they are not empty, they are not filling up as they used to fill up. They are only being partially used, which is not good. So we have storage capacity, but it's not being used because the rainfall in Brazil reduced significantly since 2012, 2013. Actually, 2012 was one of the years that rained the most, but even raining a lot, they managed to use all the water that was already stored, and then the reservoirs never fill up again. We have 2014, 2015 was the worst droughts in Brazil, but the reservoirs were lowered before that. And I told you why. It was because of the law that the previous government released that tried to reduce the cost of electricity. But so if you can use these reservoirs now, you might as well build other reservoirs which you can use. So you will have water in order to pump and to fill up the reservoir. You can't use these ones, but you can build new ones that you can use. So now I'm going to talk about seasonal pump storage, which is pretty much the approach that I propose, that we increase the energy storage in Brazil, that we always have water to pump, to store. And the comparison between conventional hydropower plants and seasonal pump storage power plants is that conventional hydropower plants, they are reservoirs built on the river, which fill up with the inflow of water into these reservoirs, and they store the water on the head of the river, on the top of the river, and then they regulate the flow of the river in order to make sure that these run-of-the-river plants below, downstream the river, will generate as maximum electricity as possible and lower the cost of electricity and optimize hydropower generation. With these seasonal pump storage plants, the arrangement is similar, but instead of having the reservoirs on the main river, you have to pump water from the main river into a reservoir parallel to the main river, and in this way you are regulating the flow of the river. When you have a lot of flow which would spill downstream, you pump some of this water, you store in the reservoir sideways, and then when you need to generate electricity or you have a drought, for example, You use all the water they stored. You generate electricity with this water from the upper reservoir of the seasonal pump storage plant to the lower reservoir of the seasonal pump storage plant, which is a storage reservoir inside this basin. That's the main strategy of how this system works. Looking at the pump storage site in particular, so this dam is in the main river. When you have energy available, for example, at night during periods of the wet period, when you have a lot of energy available, you use the electricity to pump water from the river into this reservoir, which is sideways. And having this reservoir parallel to the river is very convenient because you can vary this level of this reservoir substantially. If you have such a large level variation in the main river, you cause a huge destruction around this main river because it's a huge basin and there are a lot of people living around. There is a lot of fauna environment. In these reservoirs, you can find locations which are very small and fits very well the topography that you need a small area. And most of the water is stored because of this huge variation in head. For example, you can have head variations of 150 meters with seasonal pump storage plants, while in Brazil, the hydropower reservoir that has the highest variation in head is 35 meters, and it's embarcação. So comparing 35 with 150, much better 150. In Austria, for example, there are plants that have 80, 90 meters variation. It doesn't reach 150, but if you can do it, it's much better for the environment, for example. So in order to balance this issue of seasonal variation in hydropower generation, for example, you have 16 gigawatts of hydropower imbalance, and you invest 3 gigawatts. You invest in a seasonal pump storage plant, which has 3 gigawatts, and you pump water from the lower reservoir to the upper reservoir using 3 gigawatts because it's the capacity that you installed. But then you would reduce the amount of electricity generated during this wet period in up to 5 gigawatts, because the head that you have here is smaller than the head of the power plants below. So you reduce the amount of electricity in the hydropower plants below during the wet period, and in the dry period you generate electricity with your seasonal pump storage plant. But of course you have losses, so you have 20% of losses. So this area is 25% bigger than this area because you have 25 to 20% losses. But this area here is the same area as this one. Why? Because you store the water during the wet period, and then you generate during the dry period. So the water is just you store the water, not generate during this time, and you generate during this time. So the amount of hydropower that you can generate is the same. So this increased the overall efficiency of the operation of seasonal pump storage plant, because you have losses here, but with this energy that you get in the cascade, you don't have losses. So the losses reduce to 10%, 5%. Sometimes you even don't have losses, you have gains because you reduce the spillage in the dams downstream. I'm going to talk a little bit more about this. It might be a bit complicated to see without the right image. So comparing conventional dams with seasonal pump storage dams, with the same amount of water that you have to store in your reservoir, you can store much more energy because the altitude, the energy potential that you can store is higher, because you put in the water at 300, 400, 500 meters above the location where you collected this water in the cascade. So you increase the altitude of the water, you increase the amount of energy that you store with the altitude. And the land use, you reduce significantly the land use, because your reservoir will have a much higher level variation. And so usually the land required for these reservoirs are 10 times smaller, 50 times smaller than conventional power plants. So I'm going to go through a paper that I published with the potential in Brazil. I'm going to go quickly, not to take too long, but I'm going to mention the main aspects which are interesting about each project. So this Palmital project is in River Iguaçu. This Foz do Areia dam is very convenient because it stores water from all this section in the basin, and then this water stored is used to optimize the electricity generation in the dams below, downstream this dam. Particularly in this location where the dam is very interesting. I don't know how the water managed to put this mountain in the middle, but in the middle of this, there's a plateau here where the water is catched, and in the middle of this location you have very appropriate topography in order to build different reservoirs. And there are 3 proposed reservoirs in here, and they have different aspects. For example, Areia has a dam of 300 meters, Palmital 220 meters, Iratim 250 meters. The highest dam in Brazil have 210 meters, which is Campos Novos in the Uruguay basin. But in the world, around the world, there are several dams which have higher than 300 meters. For example, you have in China 305 meters. You have in Tajikistan the Nurek Dam, 300 meters. You have several other dams in China. So it's not something that's not possible to build such a large dam, but the larger the dam, the more level variations you can supply to your basin, the more water you can store, the more energy you can store, and the better for the better it is for the environment. Another important aspect for the operation of these reservoirs, these plants, is the variation of the head. In order to have reasonable efficiency for your turbine, the level variation of your reservoir should not surpass 40%. So for example, if you have a maximum head of, let's say, 400 meters, the minimum level of your plant should not be lower than 200 meters, because then if it's lower than 200 meters, you would need more than one turbine. If it's 50% variation, it's doable, it's expensive, it's complex. The turbine will have to be handmade and with a lot of particular aspects. It has to be a variable speed turbine in order to allow different, a large variation in flow through the turbine. But it can be done, and if the environment impact is so high and that you want to reduce the environmental impact as much as possible, so people don't go complaining about your dam. Your dam is great, it's beautiful, everyone loves it, it's expensive. And the turbine has to have a high level variation. So the highest, it's 42%, for example. In Austria, they have Limberg 2, which is 37% head variation. And in this proposed project in Iguaçu, let's talk about the Palmital. So how the system would work during the wet period, when you have a lot of water available, for example, you would pump 2 gigawatts of water to this upper reservoir, and you would reduce the generation downstream, of course, because you're storing the water, so increasing the size of this reservoir, Bento Munhoz, which usually has a monthly maybe 2 months storage capacity. I would say 1 month storage capacity if you really use the storage capacity. But if you add another one, you can have the Iguazu River to be able to store water for 2-3 years. So you have to have 3 years of drought in order to finish your water. But of course, you would need 3 good years of rain in order to fill up the reservoir also. But after you have the storage reservoir filled up, then you're good for good. You will never have problems generating electricity, especially during peak hours, with the dams in your cascade. So that's the main objective. So 2 gigawatts pumping to reduce the electricity when you're pumping. But then when you generate, you only generate 1.5 gigawatts with the water that you pumped. So you get the same amount of water that you pumped. When you generate electricity, you generate less because you have losses. So you have something like 25% losses. You only generate 1.5 gigawatts. But with the same water that you generated, you increase the generation in the cascade. And of course, you only generate electricity with this pump storage. If you don't have spillage, if it's not raining like crazy and you're wasting a lot of water, you only generate when there is no much rain. You have space available in this Bento Munhoz reservoir in order not to cause spillage, and provide good water and energy management for the basin. So considering that you would reduce the amount of spillage during this period where you would have a lot of rainfall, and provide electricity when it stops raining, you can have a systemic gain of 0.5 gigawatts. So you invest 2 gigawatts in this cascade, in this dam, in this basin, hydropower plants, and then you get to your system 0.5% because you optimize the hydropower generation of the. It's different to lose. Usually people say, oh, you use pump storage, you lose energy. In this case, you're gaining energy. It's as if your plant has a 25% capacity factor. So you invest in a plant and you get 25 capacity factor of generation, because it's not only storage, but also, of course, this plant can generate electricity during peak hours, can store electricity from wind, from solar power plants, and optimize the transmission lines, as I already explained. So several other benefits. So this is a representation for the research and development project of filling up this reservoir. We use this to estimate the amount of volume that we have in the reservoir in order to estimate the costs of energy storage. So the approach that we would operate this dam, we would always leave Foz do Areia not 100% filled up, because, for example, if there is 1 week that rains a lot and is one of those rain events that even cause flooding and damages to the basin, what we would do, we would make sure that this reservoir is something like 40%, 30% of its capacity in order to get this very rapid rainfall that happens. I think somebody entered. Yeah. Hello, Buffon. How are you? Yeah, so following here, we would maintain the reservoir low, but we would maintain these, Segredo and Salto Santiago, as high as possible, because the higher the level of these reservoirs are, the least water you need to generate the same amount of energy. So you increase the amount of energy that you can they can generate from these dams just for the level of the reservoirs being as high as possible. So you maintain all these dams with the highest possible level that they can, and you control the floods and the rain that you usually feel and cannot store in this Foz do Areia, and the seasonal and monthly storage you fill up with the seasonal pump storage plant by constantly pumping water during the wet period. In the dry period, you generate electricity by lowering the level of this palmital plant and increasing the generation in the Iguaçu cascade. So during this period, you have more likely chance of having rainfall, because in August, September is the months that you have the most rainfall. So you would operate the level of Foz do Areia even lower in order to catch some of the very heavy rain. So the problem with Foz do Areia is that if it allows it for filling up to increase the power output in order to store energy, and it's filled up, what happens is that when it rains a lot, you have floods, and it's difficult for you to manage which level should we keep this dam, because you don't know if you're going to have a flood, if you're going to spill water, if you're going to have a drought. Maybe you have 3-4 months without raining, and then you use this expecting that it's going to rain, and you need to store this flooding waters, and then the next month you don't have water for electricity generation. So having a backup reservoir that you can fill up and guarantee whenever you want, because this is not impacted by flood. This is just here sitting parallel to the river, and you can improve your water management and hydropower generation. One thing that you should never do is to allow this reservoir to reach the minimum level. Why? Because you never want this to happen again. So have the cascade of Iguaçu Fall, Iguaçu dams, for example, not having water to generate electricity during peak hours. So you always want your hydropower plants to have at least water for peak generation. Because peak generation are much more expensive and much more important for the system, and this should never happen. So you should never consider that your reservoir will come down. This would happen, for example, if you have a 3 years drought, and after 3 years of drought, if you have a 4th year drought, then this would happen. But 3 years, not 2 months, because, for example, Iguaçu River was almost empty in the beginning of the year. It filled up to 60%, and now it's zero again. So like in 10 months, it came from empty to 60% to then zero again. It's not good management. It's not good water management. It's not good hydropower management. I don't know exactly there are reasons for doing this. I particularly don't think it's ignorance. They probably want this for political reasons or something like this, because it's really bad management for hydropower. So the next project is Estrela, is in the Uruguay River. So this is the Barra Grande Reservoir. The idea is to catch water from the Canoas River and here in Pelotas. This is Pelotas River. We're building a tunnel connecting both, which you can also generate electricity. The south of Brazil have several tunnels which connect different reservoirs to optimize hydropower. So this wouldn't be something very complex. And then you have this parallel reservoir where you pump water whenever you have a large flow, you're going to spill water, you pump water, you fill up this reservoir. Of course, this pump storage sites can generate electricity during peak hours, can optimize the transmission line, and can store energy from solar power, from wind power, and all other benefits that energy storage provides. I'm gonna give you these slides if you're interested. I don't need to go through all in detail about all the details of the project, because then it's just gonna take too long. So here are the slides. Preto is an interesting project. Why? Because there's a very, very good location here, which is it might be even like a meteor strike here. There's a huge hole with a very small dam with the length. I don't show the length of the dam here, but the dam is 250 meters high. You can build a huge reservoir here. You can store 34. No, this is a flooded area. The amount of water they can store is 7.2 kilometers cubic of water, which is equivalent to...
Julian, excuse me.
Hello?
Hello. Augusto, ele caiu e não tá conseguindo voltar. Vê se ele te chamou ali.
No?
Não? Tá. Então só cuida porque ele tá tentando voltar.
Okay. Maybe it's the internet.
Yeah, okay. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Yeah, so another interesting aspect of this is because you can take water from two different basins. So the Ivaí Basin, which literally doesn't have any major hydropower plants, has some PCH, small power plants. And this one, which is a Tibagi, has Mauá, which is a mid-sized dam, but doesn't have so much storage capacity. So this section of Brazil doesn't really have much storage. So adding storage, storing this water would increase even the amount of electricity generation in Itaipu. You would be able to create new dams here, for example, because here we don't have dams because we don't have a good location for a storage reservoir in the main river. And also because Paraná state is very peculiar with environmental impacts. They're very strict with building dams and building and having impact. The land in Paraná is very expensive. It's the most expensive land in Brazil. So even if you want to build a reservoir, you have to buy the land. It might be even better not to have a reservoir there to plant, to use the land for plantation than actually building a reservoir. But it's a consideration. Maybe if you regulate the flow of this river, you'll be able to develop a new cascade of dams here. So this reservoir you have to build because you have to have at least one reservoir, lower reservoir, in order to have a pump storage plant. You need to have a lower reservoir, so you have to have at least build this lower reservoir. But then after regulating the flow of this river, you can build new ones. So this pump storage plant would be able to generate peak generation, store energy from renewable sources, and store seasonal water flows from these rivers, store big storm events. When it rains a lot, you store the water in order to use the water when you have droughts or when it stops raining. Another example similar to that, to the previous one, is in the Tocantins River. Here you have the Serra da Mesa, which is close to Brasilia. And this region is very flat. So this is very flat. There's no large desnivel of the river in order to build a good reservoir, storage reservoir. So, but around this location, you have several mountains which have the appropriate topography for building a reservoir. For example, this reservoir, Raizama, you only build a very tiny dam which can go up to 100 meters. You can have all this location to build a huge reservoir. This reservoir is too large, I would say, so it would never be built. For example, Cavalcante is a city. You will never remove, let's say, 20,000 people from a city, to build a reservoir. But for example, here you have another topography, which you build a tiny dam here, and then you can store a lot of water in this location. Maybe it's going to be more expensive than this tiny dam to store a lot of water, but you're not going to flood the whole city. And then by building this reservoir here, pumping, you can generate electricity during peak hours. You can store energy from wind, solar power. You can regulate the flow of the river. You can store energy seasonally. You can increase the energy security of the country. You can store water in a location which you wouldn't be able to store water. So then if you have a drought, you have a huge reservoir to supply water for irrigation, agriculture, whatever you want. And also you regulate the flow of the river. So when you have a large flow, you pump water continuously or not. For example, during peak hours, you don't have enough power in the grid to pump water, so you stop pumping. So this is kind of the average monthly pumping of this plant, and then doing of course peak hours you always generate electricity, but in the drought period, dry period, you generate electricity, so you regulate the flow of the river, and then you are able to make these run-of-the-river plants viable. So you have 3 viable run-of-the-river plants that don't add storage to the basin, but can generate a constant amount of electricity at cheap prices. So these plants, for example, today are not viable. Why? Because you don't have appropriate topography to build reservoirs in the river. People haven't considered the fact that they can build reservoirs parallel to the river. Now that they are aware, they should consider this as an opportunity to increase the hydropower potential of Brazil. Jardim is similar to the one in Ivaí River, which can connect to two rivers. In this case, it wouldn't be one tunnel connecting 2 because the distance is very high. So you would have one system here connecting with one tunnel and 1 power station. And here you have 1 tunnel, 1 power station. You have 2 power stations because one tunnel will be too long to connect both basins. So if you have more rain in this basin, what you can do is that you pump water here at night when you don't need power in your grid. When you need power in the grid during the day, you can generate electricity to this side, which didn't rain, and then you generate electricity, increase the flow of this river, and then you reduce the spillage in here, increase the amount of flow in this river, and then everyone's happy. Great. You can do the same if it rains a lot in here and it doesn't rain in here. You can do the opposite way around. So there are thousands of different opportunities, ideas of possible projects that you can do with this type of seasonal pump storage plant. This is a plant, the project that I stopped presenting because people are very sensible about environmental impacts and proposing that you flood a national park, which this is the Canastra Reservoir. But I didn't just because it's just to show the potential of the technology. For example, Canastra is a location which you can store twice the size of twice the amount of volume of water of Furnas. Furnas is the 3rd biggest reservoir in Brazil, but flood an area which is around 10 times smaller. So you store 2 times more volume of water. You flood an area which is 10 times smaller, and the altitude where the reservoir is something like almost 2 times higher than Furnas, because Furnas is at an altitude of 700 meters, 720, and this reservoir varies from 1,500 meters to 1,250 meters. So you put the water very high, and you have a huge level variation of 200 meters. In a very small area, you can store a lot of energy. And compared to the amount of electricity generation in the whole of Brazil, so comparing of the percentage of energy storage in Brazil, only this reservoir could store around 30% of the energy in Brazil. Adding all the storage reservoirs that we have, which are something like 100 storage reservoirs. So it should never be built because it's a national park and stuff, but if it is built, it's a huge bonus for Brazil. If this reservoir is filled up, we can have a very good idea, for example, of if we were going to buy natural gas from another country, because we will have, for example, if this reservoir is half the level, we have maybe 2 years that we will know that it would be empty. So we decide that, okay, guys, let's all buy a lot of natural gas next year and supply the natural gas very cheaply, because we know that we want only for next year, and the cost of natural gas maybe 3 times lower than if we buy natural gas from spot, the LNG, gás natural liquefied, liquefied natural gas. So it just increased substantially the energy security of Brazil, the capability of Brazil to plan to buy LNG or not, because we have a lot of thermal power plants, we don't have gas. And if we want to buy natural gas, for example, next month, the price is very high. So this is one opportunity. Another one is Barreto. So the seasonal pump storage Barreto is between São Paulo and Rio de Janeiro. It's in the lower reservoir is the Funil Reservoir in the Paraíba do Sul River. This Barreto Reservoir is a river stream in the Serra da Mantiqueira. It's not particularly inside the National Park of Mantiqueira. It's, let's say, 20 kilometers away. But so with a dam of 260 meters, you can store twice the amount of water in the Paraibuna Reservoir. The Paraibuna Reservoir, which is the one that stores water from the Paraíba do Sul River, is a large reservoir. It supplies not only electricity, water for electricity generation, but also to supply Brazil and São Paulo also with water supply. And so having this Barreto Reservoir is very interesting because it stores water for Rio de Janeiro and São Paulo. For example, if you have a drought, you still have a lot of water stored here, which is almost double the amount of water that Paraibuna stores. It can be used for peak generation because it has a difference in head of around 1,000 meters, which is very rare in Brazil to have such a high change in altitude in such a small location. It has a very small flooded area of 29 kilometers squared, which is tiny compared with any reservoirs, even with Paraibuna, which is a good energy storage reservoir. And it would store 5.5% of the electricity in the SIN, in the Sistema Interligado Nacional. So it has a huge energy storage potential because you put in water at 1,400 meters of altitude. This is similar to the projects that they have in Austria, for example, in the Alps, the ones I presented in the last lecture. Another project is Muquem. Muquem is interesting because it's in the São Francisco River and it's upstream the Sobradinho Reservoir. So when I was talking about hydropower in the second lecture, there was a lot of concern about the evaporation. In Sobradinho, yes, there's a lot of evaporation in Sobradinho. When the Sobradinho Reservoir is filled, as it should be during the wet period, around 10% of the water inside the reservoir evaporates. So it's huge evaporation. So one suggestion is to, instead of using this Sobradinho Reservoir, which is a terrible storage reservoir, you build another one, which is very good, which is Muquem. And when you have a lot of water available, you pump water mostly during the day. During the night, of course, you stop pumping when you have peak demand because the electricity is too expensive. You don't want to use expensive electricity to store energy and water. And then during the dry period, you can generate electricity. And in order not to have such a large impact on the flow of the river, for example, somebody is here, and for 1 minute to the other, you have a huge change in flow of the river because you start generating a lot of electricity. You can have a buffer reservoir where the daily and weekly cycles of electricity storage happen between these two reservoirs, and the seasonal cycles of energy storage happen between the river and this system, which is which is convenient because, for example, in Europe, that's what they do. In the Alps, they always have two reservoirs and the stream of the river. Of course, they extract water from the stream of the river, but they don't want every day this river to have such a huge change in water flow because it damages the environment. it affects the society. Maybe somebody's swimming in the river, maybe somebody's kayaking, and then you have a huge flow, which can cause death and a lot of other problems. Another benefit of this system is close to wind power potential in Brazil. So it's very close to, it's in Bahia. So this is the state of Bahia. It's very close to this location, which has huge potential for wind power. So it can also be used for storing excess wind power. It's also in a location where there is a lot of solar power generation potential. So during the day, you can pump more. During the night, you stop pumping because in order to store this intermittency from renewable energy sources. Pardo River, it's interesting because it's in the San Francisco basin, particularly in this Rio das Velhas, where this is the basin where Belo Horizonte is. There is no major river in this in this basin because it's very flat. There's no appropriate location. And given the water is very important in San Francisco basin, this basin is around 2/3 of the basin of San Francisco River. 2/3 is large. It's a large basin and no storage. This means that you cannot regulate the flow of the water that rains in this particular region. So it's good for water management to improve the uses of water that you can make for irrigation, for several other uses, even for hydropower generation. Adding a storage reservoir is very convenient. Other than that, there's no particular interest apart from seasonal storage, generation during peak demand, optimizing the grid, decentralizing the energy storage potential of Brazil. Several other benefits, but it's not. But no specific benefit. So in the Xingu River, there is a lot of there is an agreement with environmentalists that they would only build Belo Monte. But now even the indigenous regions of around the Xingu River are already being deforested. So eventually, probably in the future, it's going to become pasto. There will be nothing there. It's going to be completely destroyed, this region. If you see in the map now, the indigenous region in this region is literally the format of the indigenous region, and is already shrinking. It's very sad. It's terrible, but I mean, it's gonna happen if no one stops. People deforest in the Amazon, and it doesn't matter here. I'm just talking about the potential. So if you build this pump storage site in here, you can build a dam, which is 120 meters high. I don't know exactly the length. You can build a reservoir, and you can regulate the flow of Xingu River. This reservoir has a head variation of 90 meters. So 90 meters is 3 times higher than Furnas. The altitude is not as high as Furnas, but it's still a better reservoir than Furnas because of the huge level variation of this reservoir. And yeah, so it's a possibility. Maybe in 50 years' time, if they want to optimize hydropower generation of Xingu River, it's much better than having a seasonal pump storage reservoir than having the reservoir in the main river, which will flood a huge area. You don't store anything, it evaporates huge amounts of water, and have 200 times more environmental impact than if you build this small, tiny reservoir. It's not tiny, it's 600 kilometers square. It's maybe twice the size of Foz do Areia, but Foz do Areia is not such a small reservoir. Careca is similar, the same concept. However, Sinop is already operational. So I made this presentation in 2014. When it's orange, it's not operational. Now it is. Sinop is operational. Colíder is operational. São Manuel is operational. So these 4 are already blue in the ONS report. Tapajós stopped construction. They stopped planning their construction, but possibly in 5 years they're going to build it again. So this reservoir has a appropriate topography around this location, which you can build a reservoir, you can fill it up. It has a variation of 70 meters. So Sinop has a variation of 8 meters. If you see Sinop, it's something around 4 times smaller the area, but Sinop stores nothing compared with the amount of water that you can store in this reservoir. Sinop compared with this reservoir, it's a terrible reservoir. Of course, this needs a little bit more area, not a little bit more area, 4 times more area, but it's a huge reservoir that can regulate the flow of this river. And you already have 4 dams in here. You're gonna increase the potential of these dams for generating hydropower, let's say 30%. So it's as if you build a new one, and you also store electricity, you provide peak generation, and all the other benefits which I mentioned already from power seasonal pump storage. This is a similar one. However, these dams have not been built yet. Tapajós is not built yet. This is a huge reservoir. You can see the topography. A large dam here, very extensive dam, but it can regulate the flow of the river. So this is an option. But if you do something like they did, for example, in Tucuruí, where they flooded 3,000 kilometers of area, and they leave a vast devastation when it's empty, this area, 3,000, is 4 times smaller. Yes, it's still huge, but it stores much more water, let's say 5 to 6 times more water. Maybe you don't need such a huge reservoir. This reservoir is too large, but it's possible. So I'm just showing that the different possibilities which have not been considered. Even in the Araguaia River Basin, you can have a lot of potential for seasonal pump storage reservoirs, for seasonal storage. There is also a possibility of storing water within the basin. So if you control the level of the river, you build a very tiny dam, which the maximum level is the maximum river level, which already exists, and you just control the level. You store a lot of water in the basin. So it's a different technology. It's not seasonal pump storage. It's just a basin where the water is not stored in reservoirs, in the surface. It's stored on the ground, below, on the sand. This increases the humidity of the soil, and the impact is much smaller and has a huge potential for energy and water storage in the Araguaia Basin with very, very, very small environmental impacts. So this is different work that I developed for CPFL R&D project, ANEEL R&D project. So this is in the Tucuruí Basin on Lajeado. So it's the same idea. You have a large reservoir, you fill up during the wet period, you reduce the spillage in the Tucuruí River. The dam is something like, it can be 190 meters high, or 160 meters high, or 140 meters high. This has an impact on the useful volume of storage, 9.4, 6.4, 4.2, of course, the cost of the project. But this is a very good project because of the topography of this location allows a large variation of reservoir. So the variation is from 390 to 520, which is 130 meters. It's significant, it's good, a lot of water, low flooded area, and can regulate the flow of Tocantins River from Lajeado Reservoir. Another one is São Tomé. São Tomé is in the state of Rio Grande do Sul. The advantage of this plant is because Rio das Antas has already 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 dams downstream the location of this São Tomé plant is proposed. 7 is a lot of dams. It's already scheduled for being constructed. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 other dams, and there is no storage reservoir. So all of them are run of the river. So what happens that when it rains here, it generates a lot of electricity, but it spills a lot of water. So there is a lot of energy being wasted because it rains, all the water goes, and then next week, the generation of electricity reduces substantially. So in this basin is interesting because for example, this project, if you have a seasonal pump storage here, it stores water from this location. And whenever you have rain in this location, you can pump water and store in this reservoir. This reservoir is, let's say, 10 or 20 times smaller flooded area than if you would build an equivalent storage reservoir in the Antas River, which is probably interesting for the state of Rio Grande do Sul. So the state of Rio Grande do Sul was very, very, very concerned about the environment. Probably a lot of German people which care about the environment. They're very, very good people. They don't want damage. They want nice scenery. And they build this. Of course, it's great. It's like it's done in Europe. But the problem is that it's not so efficient because you have a lot of losses. So if you add 1 or 2 or 3 reservoirs of this, you can substantially increase efficiency of this hydropower generation. So for example, here's the Antas River. You can build this dam here. You don't need to excavate, which is great. Why? Because you catch water from the reservoir up here. So downstream the dam, you build your casa de força, powerhouse. So it's around 40 meters lower than where the water is catched, which is good because you don't need to excavate. The excavation of these power plants costs something like 10 to 20% of the overall project cost. And then you have a tunnel connecting the lower reservoir with the upper reservoir. This tunnel, maybe this is not the best alternative. Why? Because if this tunnel is here, it would have to be a high pressure tunnel because you would have 125 meters head, increasing the pressure of this tunnel, which is very expensive. So you need, for example, a penstock, like those steel pipelines, in order to sustain the pressure. So maybe a better solution would be to have an excavated power plant somewhere around here. So then the penstock is limited to 300 meters head of the power plant, 340 meters. Sorry, here I put kilometers, but it's not kilometers, it's meters, I'm sorry. So 340 meters, lower the reservoir, and then you have a tunnel which does not require so much pressure. So it's just a tunnel where you throw some cement around the tunnel. You don't need a steel pipe in order to contain the high pressure. It's just a tunnel digged, which does not have so much high pressure, and then you can use it, and it's much cheaper. So I would say now, after looking at this and after evaluating, I would put the powerhouse here. Of course, you have to add the cost of the project by excavation, increase 10 or 20%, but at least you don't need steel pipeline, 5 kilometers of steel pipeline, which will be substantially more expensive. This is the topography of the reservoir varying, which we use to estimate the amount of water stored in this reservoir. It's a small reservoir, stores a lot of water, and regulates the flow of this river compared with so this plant would have something like 1 gigawatt of installed capacity. The operating dams have something like 500 megawatts, and the ones being planned has 900 megawatts. And so the amount of generation of the cascade would be similar to the São Tomé. But this is good because if you have a large power capacity, when you have a lot of rain, you can use all the energy generated in this plant to pump water to this reservoir here, and in order to reduce the amount of flow of the reservoir or of these dams, which then you can use the water that you stored here in order to generate electricity when the rain stops, regulate the flow of the river. Looking at the transmission lines, also benefits of this type of seasonal storage is that you store the seasonal variations of Amazonas basins. So if you build as close as possible to the Amazon basin, you have projects which would reduce the transmission costs from electricity generation from dams in the Amazon. No one's talking about dams in the Amazon anymore, but possibly in 5 to 10 years they will start talking again, and this would be very interesting to lower the cost, lower the impact of the project. So comparing these projects that are presented, if you look at the flooded area, the added flooded area, if you add all the flooded area for all the projects, you have the area of the Tucuruí reservoir, which is 3,300 meters. So it's equivalent to one reservoir in Brazil. Storage that this reservoir would supply to the Brazilian electricity sector is so 140% of the storage. So you will double the storage capacity of Brazil plus 40%. So it's considerably better than conventional power plants, the seasonal power plants, because the flooded area is much smaller. That's what I'm trying to explain here. Compared with, for example, Sobradinho. Sobradinho has an area of 4,200 meters squared of area, so much larger than these reservoirs, and stores only 10% of the electricity of Brazil. So this is smaller and stores 10 times more. Looking at the investment costs, this such project would be more expensive than conventional pump storage plants, so daily pump storage plants, because of the dams will have to be higher, they have to be longer, larger dams, you have to buy the lands to flood the land. You have to, usually in order to reach these locations with good topography to build good reservoirs, you need tunnels which are longer than if you want to build a daily pump storage, which you can build whenever you want, because you just need more storage. But if you add the costs, so this is the amount of costs that you have to invest, but given the fact that you have 10 hydropower plants below your system and you're regulating the flow, if you take into account the capacity of the dams below, the cost becomes the same as the daily energy storage project. But this is much more convenient because it's not only used to generate electricity during 2 hours. You generate the electricity during 2 hours, during peak hours, but you also regulate the flow of the river. You store energy seasonally, increase the energy security of the country, and several other things. So comparing seasonal pump storage plants with conventional reservoirs in flooded area, you have that seasonal pump storage plants flood 0 to 10 meters, kilometers squared of area per gigawatt, average gigawatts generation of energy storage. Compared with the average of conventional hydropower plants, it's 10 times lower the area required for conventional plant. And compared with very bad projects, for example, Balbina, it's 1,000 times, 100 times better. Maybe even 1,000 times. So the best one here, which is 2, is 1,000 times better than Balbina. So there is one project here, the one in Rio de Janeiro, which is 2. So 2 kilometers squared per gigawatt measure of storage. So it's 2,000 times better. It is a lot better. So here we show the amount of flooded area per energy storage. This was taken from one of my papers, so it's in terawatt hour, which is the connotation that they use for energy storage around the world. And the biggest in Balbina. So the Amazon, they have very bad reservoirs. So the conventional reservoirs, flood a huge area, but seasonal pump storage ones, which are these ones, which I propose, it require much smaller land. So for example, compare these ones in the Amazon with the ones that already exist or they are being planned, they are 100 times smaller. And in the southeast, where you have very good topography, a lot of water is around 2, which is substantially smaller than the average reservoirs. So that's the main benefit. Of course, you should also be careful where you build your reservoir. You don't want to build in indigenous land. For example, in the Xingu, you never consider this. I'll just show you for technical aspects in order to show that it's possible, but it's not viable environmentally or socially. And then I show here the locations which have environmental protected areas and indigenous areas which would not be considered for construction. Comparing the land and energy storage in this graph, you have that seasonal pump storage plants generally are 10 times flood an area 10 times smaller than good reservoirs in the southeast region and 100 times less area than in the Amazon basin. So they're good. Also, the impact on the population is much smaller because the area, or the flooded area is smaller, is usually built in mountains. There are no one living in these locations. So the social impact is much smaller also. And this is a different arrangement, which I think it's interesting to share with you guys, which some topographies, you don't have location to build large reservoirs on the top of the mountain, but you have good locations to build reservoirs or close to the ground. So for example, in the Mato Piba region, you have a location where you can build upper reservoir, which is tiny, small, so you can store only 1 day or 1 week amount of energy, weekly storage, daily storage, and then you have your large reservoir here. You have a tiny dam here, so when you're pumping water from the main river, you generate electricity. So if you want to store energy seasonally, you have 1 or 2 turbines pumping constantly the amount of water into the lower reservoir, and then you have other turbines which will generate electricity to this reservoir. Of course, it's not a good idea to pump and generate at the same time. The only reason why you would want to do this is not to impact the flow of this river, which has environmental impacts also. So maybe what you can do, you can have an intermediate pumping station that will, if you stop pumping to the upper reservoir, you turn on this pump, which just pumps into the lower reservoir. You can always find different solutions in order to supply your needs, but this is interesting because if you pump water up and then you generate, you have a large head variation that you can vary, which is 50% of the maximum head, as I mentioned before. So you can vary this reservoir, let's say 50 meters, 100 meters. In this case, the variation is 50 meters. It's very convenient to have a reservoir in this area with 50 meters, because if you build a reservoir here with 10 meters variation, you flood an area 10 times larger because the topography is not convenient for storage reservoir. So now I'm going to go through the computational model that I created. I'm going to share with you. I have half an hour. So I published, show the global potential for seasonal pump storage around the world. And it was very interesting because now I'm part of a forum invited from the Department of Energy in the US, and I'm collaborating with them to improve this mapping tool. And the idea is that, of course, you need a topography from where you want to work. We use the data from NASA. The name is as RTM. It has a 3-second resolution, but we increased the resolution to 50 seconds because it was taking far too long to converge the model. It's too much potential, too much data. It took a month to convert for the whole world. For Brazil, it takes a week. We took these locations, these topography. So this is, each square of this is 5 degrees latitude and longitude of Brazil. And the reason why we have these sections is because the memory that you require to run this model is very high. And if you take the whole of Brazil, you don't have enough memory. So that's why we decided to operate in small chunks. Also, operating small chunks, you can run 7 consoles at the same time in parallel, which then will give you quicker. Instead of taking 7 weeks, takes 1 week. We remove Venezuela here because there are too many projects here, and we wouldn't want to analyze them because they are sharing border with another country, and we thought that it's not very interesting. We also have Strahler data. So Strahler data shows the complexity of the river. So the higher the Strahler number, the higher the amount of flow in the river, the higher the amount of streams flowing into the river. So you have streams 1, 2, 3. We only consider in the model locations to build in reservoirs with River Strahler 1, which already has some shape, which resembles a river, which you can build a dam and can store some water. And we only consider rivers with, so the seasonal pump storage, the pump storage, even daily pump storage. So this model also produces daily and weekly and monthly pump storage, or every type of pump storage types. So the limitation is that the upper reservoir has to have a River Strahler at least 3 times smaller than the lower reservoir, because if not, you would have a reservoir here which connects into the same point, and pumping water from the same river doesn't make sense. Also, if you have 3 and 4, you have a reservoir here which pumps water from the same reservoir. Doesn't make sense. But if you have, for example, a reservoir here, you can take water from the 4, 2, you take water from 4, 1, take water from 3, and that's the limitations that we created, and resulted in good results and reduced the amount of computational time. The hydrological data has a higher resolution, so we had to create a methodology in order to match within the 5-degree latitude, longitude, what's the flow of the river for different Strahler. So we created an average value. So for resolution, it worked okay, the methodology. I'm going to share with you this code, so you guys feel free to run it, to improve it, to, if you want, of course. And I also share the results of this data, right? So what it does for each River Strahler 1, at least, so 1 up, it checks if there is a higher River Strahler around 20 kilometers away, because it limits the amount of the length of the tunnel in 22 kilometers. If it finds a river, it goes to the next step. It compares the head of the river and the length of the river. So if you divide the head divided by the length, it has to be higher than 10. So if you have a 10 meters head, at least the tunnel has to be 1 kilometer long. So this is very bad project, but I wanted this to be as provide as many projects as possible, because maybe the minimum head is 10, but you can build a huge 20 meters high dam, which you can store a lot of water. So that's the reason why I limited it to 10. If I limit it to 15, 20, or 25, of course, there will be less projects. It will take less time to convert. Reducing further to 5 or 1, it wouldn't really make sense, because there will be terrible projects. So we stick with 10. So that point where you have water to extract, and the head that you have is viable, it will produce possible dams that can be built in this location. So it produces a dam from left to right, top to bottom, and the diagonals. And if you can fit a dam there with a 30, 60, 120, so I increase different type of dams with a with a with a with a length, minimum length of 7.2 kilometers, then it's a dam. You continue producing the project. If you can't fit a dam smaller than 7 kilometers, then it just stops developing the project. So it would only consider if the value of the dam is the lowest in the dam, because not to reproduce different projects, and you have always the point where the dam is where the river is, to make it convenient and to also reduce the computational time. And then these are the variation parameters. For example, we have the dams varying every 30 meters. We have the length of the pipeline varying every 1 kilometer up to 10 kilometers, then 2 kilometers up to 20. The river Strahler, it starts at 1. I forgot to add 1 here, is 1, 2, 3, up to 12. 12, the only river which is 12 is the Amazon River. And the flooded area in this river Strahler, where the water comes from, so where you pumping the river, the major river, so the higher the river Strahler, the higher the area which I allow it to develop. Because if you have a very small 2 Strahler river, you wouldn't have enough water in order to flood a huge reservoir. So it doesn't make sense to allow the computer to develop a reservoir, to flood a reservoir with 1,600 kilometers square. So I limit to 20, and the bigger the Strahler, the bigger I allow the reservoir to be. And then we develop the reservoirs. We have the topography, so we estimate how much water we can store in these reservoirs. And here is the variation of the quota and the volume, the volume and the level of the reservoir. For example, for this reservoir here, we would have the reservoir varying, for example, from a height of 760 meters to 840 meters, which is a variation of 80 meters. We wouldn't want to vary this, because the amount of water that you store with this 20 meters additional head is very small, but this 20 meters is much higher, you see? So it's an optimization question, which you want to know what's your head variation. The higher the heads, the more energy you store, the more energy you generate. So you want to make it as high as possible for energy purposes, but you want to make it as low as possible for volume storage purposes. So there's an optimization project there. We don't do this optimization. We assume in this model, we assume that all the storage is used for variations, which is not the case, but usually when the reservoir is low, the storage capacity is very low anyway. So we just stick with it. To estimate project costs, we have dam costs, which one of the people from the project for CPFL R&D developed this curve. The other costs I took from this publication from Norway, and they have the tunnel costs, the excavation costs, the pipeline diameter, how that affects the tunnel costs, excavation costs of the power plant, the Francis turbine costs, the equipment that needs to come with the turbine, the generator, the electric equipment that comes with the generator. And then we have the costs of the project, so of the pipeline, or of the dam, of the land. I assume some costs of the land. And then we want to estimate the cost of the energy storage, which is how much energy you can store. So is the cost of the project brought to today's value. So I have to divide by the discount factor, and then divide by the amount of energy that you store, which is here. So you have the project cost divided by the amount of water you can store is the cost of water. This project cost is also divided by the discount factor in order to bring all the costs to the year costs of the project. And then you have costs with considering that energy storage cost, considering that you can generate electricity in all the cascade. So this is with the cascade. So you store energy within the seasonal pump storage plant, but you also generate in all the cascade, which the cost reduces to half. If you usually half, sometimes reduces 3 times, 5 times, sometimes it reduces only 20%, 50%, depending on the arrangement of the head of the seasonal pump storage plant and the amount of heads that you have of hydropower plants on the downstream. This is the cost without cascade. You just want to know how much energy you have within your system, for example. And this is the cost of the power capacity. So there are two main different costs here. One is cost of energy storage. So the main contributions are the area that you have, the land, the dam, and the amount of water you can store there. And the other one is the power. So the tunnels, the powerhouse, the excavation of the powerhouse, the turbine, the generator, the substation, the transmission lines. This is the power cost. And of course, a good project has a good combination of energy storage costs and power costs. So we run the program. We have some results which shows this is in $1 billion, gigawatts hour. The main projects. So these are, so from all the project, the results that we have, we separated them in the costs per installed capacity. So for daily storage, so daily storage plants should have generation gigawatts installed capacity, cheap gigawatts installed capacity. So the cheapest ones are the ones where you have the Serra do Mar, for example, os canyons, né? in the Rio Grande do Sul, where you have a very high head difference in a very short distance between one and the other. And this is more or less the potential, the cost of Brazil for daily pump storage, daily, weekly pump storage, where you want is the power. You want power. You want 5 gigawatts. You want to have 5 gigawatts during 3 hours or 3 days. This is the kind of projects that you'll be looking at. This, on the other hand, is the cost of energy storage. So is reals per megawatt hour. So this is energy, is not power. And usually is the best locations are on the head of a river basin, because this takes into account the amount of energy that you store in your reservoir and that you can generate in the seasonal pump storage plant and in the cascade. So the higher in the cascade that you are, the better. It has a distribution of projects here. You can see here is the Uruguay River. There are several projects which can store energy cheaper than 25 reals per megawatt, some 80 reals per megawatt. For example, this is convenient. For example, if in the wet period, the price of the LED price is 100 megawatts, and in the dry period, the prices go up to 250 megawatts. And if you store energy during the PLD, in the PLD, given that the PLD is not horário, you would just pump for 6 months continuously electricity at 100 bills. Of course, you have to pay the cost of your seasonal pump storage plant, which is $25. So the final cost of the energy storage will be 100, because the cost of electricity plus 25, 125. When you generate electricity at 200, 250, you would have something like 70 bills per megawatt hour of profit from the project. So this is the reason why seasonal pump storage is interesting. Brazil, the cost of electricity varies month by month depending on how much water you have, how much electricity you have. So it is a viable alternative for generating electricity, for making money. The only problem is that you don't have a regulation today in order to make this viable. So if you pump water in your reservoir, you only generate within your station. You're not going to get any benefit from the generation that you have downstream because they already have different owners, right? So in order to make this type of solution viable, you have to make regulations that the person that's building this project will have enough returns in order to make this project viable, in order to be able to build the project, to have financial incentives for people to put money in this and build this type of reservoir. So in the southeast, huge potential also. This is the Rio Grande. So here's the Canastra and all the other locations which are interesting. This is the Paranaíba, also several potential. In here, so this is the São Francisco River. So also several locations, good locations, cheap locations. There's even in the Northeast region, usually they are more expensive because they don't have a cascade and because there's not so much water. So the reservoirs are very difficult to fill up. There's also in the Tocantins River, this is the Lajeado one, it's not so cheap. So if it's really expensive, 200 reals per megawatt is just too expensive, it's not considered. So only these green ones are the ones that really make sense. This is the potential for daily pump storage. So if you want to store, if you want to generate power, the cost for generating power doesn't vary so much because there are a lot of good projects. So it varies from 1,800,000,000 reals to 2,100,000,000 reals per megawatt hour. So I only in Google Map and Google Earth. So I have this data in Google Earth. Google Earth only allows you to load 2,500 projects per KLM. So that's why it's limited. So this can go up to $5 billion per megawatt hour. These are the other locations for the potential for daily storage. So within Google Earth, you can click one of the projects. You can have you have the latitude, you have the altitude of the river where the water is coming from, you have the latitude of the river, you have the minimum head, maximum head variation, the length of the dam, the altitude of the dam, the length of the dam, the amount of water you can store in the reservoir, the amount of energy you can store in the reservoir, the flooded area, the index of flooded area. In this case, it's 20. 20 is okay. 50 kilometers. So when I ran this, I ran 50 kilometers. The people from CPFL asked me to reduce to 20. Diameter of the tunnel, the number of tunnels, the river straler, the flow of the river, average flow of the river, seasonal, the seasonality. So I have an index showing the seasonality, the interannual variation of the river. I don't use this particularly in this project. I use in the paper for nature. Pumping flow, dam costs, tunnel costs, excavation costs, all the costs, land costs, and then the cost of water storage, energy storage, which is the cost of the project divided by the amount of energy stored. I'm going to send you guys this. If you're interested, have a look. It will probably not be very nice if you sell it for somebody else, but yeah, you're free to do it if you want. But yeah. This is a public project, right? It's public money. It's funded by ANEEL with public funds. So I believe in this public thing. I don't want to develop something with public money and make it my own. I don't trust in this type of development. So these are the results. For example, let's have a look at the south of Brazil, where we are. If we want to look at projects, for example, this is the Iguaçu River, is it? No, this is the Uruguay River. So this is probably Passo Fundo River. And you can see that it develops projects with those restrictions. So it looks at the location. So these dots are the dams. The straight lines are the tunnels. The locations which are very colorful are the locations with a lot of tunnels. So they add up just to show, for example, here is a location where there are a lot of projects. The sum of all these projects are 4 million projects. A lot of projects the software developed, and I select the 2,500 best projects for daily storage and the 2,500 best projects for seasonal pump storage projects. As you can see, most of the projects are in locations where you have this change in altitude. They are not always projects where you have big rivers, for example. Where you don't have big rivers, you have small rivers, but you still have projects here. Of course, these projects have a very small change in altitude, which they're never going to be built. So they are very expensive. They just become too expensive that you select them out if you have a limit of cost, for example. However, these projects here, they're around the river, particularly the ones which are on the top of Antas River, so this region, several good projects for seasonal pump storage. These projects which don't have so much water, so these here they don't have water, so they are usually very tiny reservoirs, but they are good for peak generation. So here, like for example, these are good daily, weekly, daily, weekly pump storage projects for power. These are good projects for energy storage. It was a lot of work to do this model. At least, so I got money from YASA, and then after I got money from CPFL to improve, right? Of course, the project, a model can always improve, increase the amount of alternatives and arrangements that you can make. For example, in the report, I have all the premissas, limitações, incertezas e outros, which are room for improving the model even further. So I'd say all the limitations, all the benefits, the assumptions, which can be turned into further details in the computational. And concluding the lecture, so we have that seasonal pump storage plants, they're good for peak generation. They reduce the intermittency from solar and wind. They increase the Brazilian energy storage capacity. They enable the construction of new power plants because of the regulation of the flow of the river. They reduce the spillage and evaporation of the dam downstream. So you optimize the amount of energy that you can generate from existing dams. You increase the storage efficiency. So you can have seasonal pump storage dams which store energy with efficiency higher than 100%, because if you didn't have the plants there, the dams will be always with the low level. They wouldn't always operate with the maximum level. You will have spillage, the rain would occur and all the water will just spill away. So if you have seasonal pump storage plant, you optimize the generation. In the hydropower, so you can have efficiencies of 150%, maybe have efficiencies of 120%. And So it's very interesting energy storage solution. You reduce storage costs. As I mentioned, for example, the project in Rio de Janeiro, if you store energy close to the demand, you can optimize the transmission lines at night when the transmission lines would be sleeping. They're not sleeping because you have a storage alternative. You use the transmission lines to bring energy from far away, close to the demand. You can enable the construction of run-of-the-river plants, so very good environmentally friendly with very low flooded area dams in the Amazon. Similarly to, for example, Belo Monte. Belo Monte is very criticized, but is a project which have very small environmental impacts. The only problem is that for the construction of Belo Monte, you had to take something like 300,000 people there for the construction of the dam, and people that were not really used to the way of life of people that live in the Amazon region. So after the construction of the dam was finished, they just started to deforest the Amazon because they're driven by money. They just want a bigger car. They want to pay their school the kids in a private university and blah blah. Anyway, just like all of us are, but it just increases the deforestation. So having people in the Amazon, the problem is that they will just go and start sowing the trees and selling to illegally, because if they sold illegally, it will be good for me at least, because they'll have to pay taxes, right? 20%, 30% taxes. The problem is selling the wood illegally, because the only persons that benefits is the ones that are buying the wood and the ones that are selling the wood. Anyway, decentralize the energy storage of Brazil. So, for example, if it doesn't rain in the southeast of Brazil, it might rain in the south of Brazil. So then you can store energy and that rain in the south of Brazil. So you decentralize the energy storage potential of Brazil, which is very interesting because increases the chances that you always have a location to store energy. Because if it doesn't rain in one basin, it rains in the other basin. Lower environmental and social impact, as I showed you, and increases the water availability of multiple uses of water. So, for example, you're building a reservoir, you're storing water. So if, for example, you have a drought, you still have a large reservoir there storing tons and tons of water that can be used to supply water needs for years and years after of droughts. Right, so that was it. There's 160 slides. I guess I managed talking through 160 slides. I had to talk very quickly to go through all the content. I'm gonna send you the codes. I'm gonna send you the results, data, for you to have a look if you want to make a project out of this, and for some reason use it in a way that you want. Please feel free. Do you guys have any questions, comments?
Julian, I would like to ask how much time it took to you to finish this dam program, this dam project software?
Took something like 6 months.
And you worked it all alone?
No, all along 2 months. 6 months is to operate, because it took a month just to run the software, right? So you run, and after you realize, oh my God, I forgot to add this, and then I have to run again, and then you run again.
Okay, it's very impressive. Congratulations.
Thanks. Yeah, so I'll send you the codes, but I'm not gonna send you the data, because in the codes there is where the data is and stuff, because the data is 30 gigawatts, right? Very heavy data, and it's complex. I'm gonna send you the links so then you can download on the website the data yourself. There is other data which I think the only data which is not available is the hydrological data. So if you're really interested, you want to run this, I can send you the hydrological data. It's not documented. which is a shame because I mean it takes like a week to document well a code, and it's work which is very painful, very annoying, and I hate documenting code. So if you have a question, if you want me to go through, just give me a shout, and probably in an hour I can go through step if you're interested. Any other question? I usually present this very excited because it was I mean, first I didn't even know that this type of seasonal power plants, seasonal pump storage plants existed. I even started like patenting the idea, and I started, looking for patents and stuff. But in the end, I learned that there is several projects like this in Austria. Austria, there are maybe like 10, 20 projects like this. Switzerland, Norway. So most countries that have environmental concerns, they don't want to use large reservoirs in the river, where there is always a large settlement, a lot of cities, people living around major rivers, huge environmental impact. So you build in a mountain where there's not even trees, not even trees live there. So you build a dam there, boom, fill up with a lot of water. So that's the main concern, the main reason why these projects are interesting in the environmental area. Yeah, so I realized that this already exists. Now I published this. There is a project. EPFL was interested. Now the project is going to finish. State Grid wants to invest in another projects, which are also going to be part. ANEEL, INEPE, ONS, I always present this to ANEEL, IPE, ANES, but they take a long time to realize the potential for this. So they haven't considered or added to the planning yet. I have been presenting this, I probably presented this to them. They're always interested, they always have questions, but it didn't sink the idea yet. But at least the fact that I can have the opportunity to present this and show this is interesting. This forum of pump storage that I'm taking part as part of IASA, I'm going to further improve this model. So I'm going to continue developing this model with them, and they're going to pay IASA. I don't know if you guys know, but I'm also working for IASA. I'm a visiting professor, but I kept my job at IASA in Austria. Anyway, so this literally these five lectures that I gave you, they are all from papers that I wrote. Even the hydropower one, the pump storage one, this one, they're all papers that I wrote. So I'm not saying anything that I read from a book. I'm not saying anything that I read from a paper. I'm saying things that I wrote in papers that I published. It's 4 lectures. The next lectures, they're going to be more didactic, and they're going to be like kind of literally the knowledge that I have about the subject, but they're not going to be very innovative and kind of new. They're going to be common knowledge. I'm trying to be as creative as I can in order to bring the best spots of each technology. But I think that's done. Hydropower pump storage. I'm not sure exactly what's going to be the topic for next week. Maybe batteries, maybe fuel cells, hydrogen. Are you guys interested in hydrogen? Maybe, I don't know. Do you have any preferences? I guess hydrogen then.
Yes, probably.
Anyway.
And
what do you say, Tata?
Julian, first, thank you for sharing everything. I think you have a great knowledge, and it's really great for you to share everything. You are really open, so that's not so common. So thank you. And
Julian, can I ask in Portuguese one question?
Yeah, go for it. Yeah.
Ok. Tem projeto novo que nós estamos para iniciar agora, que é a partir a geração de energia a partir de resíduos da indústria calçadista. E em determinado momento, esse cliente diz que sobra hidrogênio, né, do processo dele. Provavelmente deve ser pirólise ou ainda alguma gaseificação, mas sobra hidrogênio. E então, uma grande pergunta, uma questão, que é o que a gente está estudando agora, é o que fazer com esse hidrogênio. Se vale a pena armazenar, se não vale a pena, se vale a pena, né? Talvez algum assunto nesse caminho seja interessante abordar, né?
Beleza. A digestão anaeróbia produz mais ou menos 4, 5% de hidrogênio, dependendo da temperatura, né?
Uhum.
Mas tem um pouquinho, não é muito hidrogênio, mas uma parte é metano mesmo. Muito interessante, parabéns, legal. Obrigado pelo interesse, vou focar mais nessa questão.
Então, de repente, pode ser algum caminho interessante, né? Eu sei que a ideia não é abordar esse assunto em específico, mas sim a tecnologia, né, de hidrogênio, armazenagem, né? Alguma coisa nesse sentido.
Tá. Esse assunto particular seria mais na parte de biogás,
Sim,
biomassa.
perfeito.
Eu vou falar sobre biogás e biomassa.
Ok. Perfeito, Júnior. Obrigado.
Valeu, falou, Bufão.
Perfeito.
Anyone else? Questions, suggestions? Okay, so 6 o'clock. It was great to talk to you guys. Next week, I'll talk about hydrogen. And please let me know if you have any questions about the assignment. And thank you so much.
Thank you, Julian. Bye.
Yes, bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks, bye.
Bye.
Ciao.